Welcome to the Thriving Leaders podcast, where we dive into real conversations that help leaders grow, teams flourish, and organisations thrive. I'm your host, Claire Gray, Leadership and Team Facilitator at Thriving Culture. I'm also the author of Thriving Leaders, Learn the Skills to Lead Confidently, and Thriving Teams, When Teams Unite, Align and Achieve. This podcast is filled with practical tools, tips, actions, and insights that you can immediately apply so you can lead confidently. I interview thought leaders from across the globe. I hope you enjoy the podcast. For many of the leaders I work with navigating situations where they genuinely need to work with someone they don't agree with, don't particularly like, or simply don't trust, maybe it's a peer who doesn't see the world the same that you see it. Maybe it's a stakeholder relationship that feels a bit stuck or uncomfortable, or maybe it's within your own team, a fellow executive, or even a board member. Whatever the context is, the instinct often is to avoid the situation, work around the person, or wait for someone else to resolve the issue. And it rarely works. So today's guest has spent over 35 years helping people do really hard things, the things we know we need to do, but aren't quite sure how to do them. So I'm joined by Adam Kahane, our founding partner of Reos Partners and author of Collaborating with the Enemy, which has just been released in a brand new second edition. Adam has supported collaboration across some of the world's toughest challenges, from post-apartheid South Africa to peace processes in Colombia. And his work is every bit as relevant for everyday leadership challenges that we face in organisations every day. Adam is the author of many books, including Solving Tough Problems, An Open Way of Talking, Listening and Creating New Realities. And the Nelson Mandela said this breakthrough book addresses the central challenges of our time, finding a way to work together to solve the problems we have created. I'd read Collaborating with the Enemy last year and referenced it in Thriving Teams, which came out in November. And at the same time, Collaborating with the Enemy Edition 2 also was released, and I've just finished reading it. So I'm really excited about unpacking it today. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you, Claire.
Awesome. So for people who might be new to your work, how do you describe what you do and why it's so important and why it matters?
Well, you mentioned that I worked in South Africa. This is now more than 35 years ago, just as apartheid was ending, but as people were trying to figure out how to make it to democracy. And in fact, I'm in South Africa now when we're talking, so I've lived here part of the year for those 35 years, part of the year in my hometown of Montreal, part of the year here. And what I discovered there, and what I've been doing all day, every day since then with Reos Partners is helping people work together to address their tough challenges. And the reason that's important is because most of the things we're trying to do, we can't do alone. And oftentimes we have to work with people who see things differently, or who come from different places, or with whom we have fundamental differences. So collaborating across difference, I think, is increasingly important and increasingly difficult. And that's what I try to help people do, both through Reos's facilitation work and through the books I'm writing.
Yeah. And you say it's becoming increasingly more difficult. Why do you think that is? Because I feel that too. I think organisations and people feel it globally, but within teams as well, because we need to work across boundaries more and more. Why do you see it being more challenging now?
So in all of my questions, I'm going to try to answer across the scales, because for better or worse, that's how I think about things. And my particular bent is to see what's similar across different situations in my family, in my company, in my community, in my country, globally. So, well, I think there's a lot of factors that go into why it's becoming more difficult. I guess the positive factor, if I can put it that way, is that people are less willing to put up with shit than they might have been in previous generations. So when their boss or their partner or their neighbor tells them something that doesn't work for them, people are more willing to say, no, that doesn't work for me. So I think there's that, a greater willingness to speak up for yourself and to to assert what you need and what's different for you. I think that would be one factor. But the other factor I notice is this tendency. I see it in myself. I see it in my family. I see it with people around me, is that when things get tough, I think our default is more often to pull back and to separate. And the COVID period didn't especially it wasn't especially difficult for me. My wife and I were happily in our house for 18 months, and anyhow, I was already working a lot online. But I think it had a much bigger impact than I realized at the time for people who say, actually, I don't want to have to deal with all these people at the office or in the bus or in the shops. I'm gonna do things from my home, or more fundamentally, I'm gonna associate with the people I want to associate with. And the Zoom world, like the conversation we're having now, makes that more achievable than it used to be. And so this, what used to be normal life of jostling with lots of people you don't know or necessarily agree with or like or trust in normal outside the house life, I think has fallen away, and political polarization and authoritarianism. So it's a long list of things, but the result is, I would say, a diminishing capacity to work across difference at the same time as there's an increasing need to work across difference, not just in our family and community and companies, but also globally on issues that can't be dealt with except together.
And I guess even Nelson Mandela said we need to be working together on some of these tough challenges. So,
actually, he said it in a more particular way that I thought was very revealing. He said, addressing the challenges we created.
Yeah.
So this idea that it's easy, and I'm mentioning this because I think it's a fundamental point that we'll probably come back to several times, that it's easy to, or it's easier to say, well, things are crap, but it's all what those other people did. And so I found it surprising and revealing that Mandela, of all people, said, no, to deal with the situation we've co-created.
Yeah. I think that's so important. I talk a lot about accountability, and there's often a lot of finger pointing and blame that happens. It's everyone else's fault rather than our agency or our contribution to it. So I think there's a link there, obviously, to having some agency and accountability to move forward some of these challenges too. Yeah. So, it's been nearly a decade since you wrote the first book. You've talked about why it's getting harder. So why did you decide to update a second edition? What's changed?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First of all, I love writing, and there were just things I wasn't happy about with the first edition, and you don't often in life get a chance for a do-over. So there were lots of things I just thought could be said more clearly. And also, I had the idea that the world had caught up with the book in a way, that things I was talking about 10 years ago that maybe weren't so obviously important were more obviously important. So when my publisher invited me to make a second edition, I've never done a second edition before, I said, yes, happy to do it on the condition that I can rethink it from the beginning. And I ended up making a lot of changes to the book, and in some ways fundamentally shifting the logic and the argument. And we can go into that.
Yeah. I'm very intrigued, and I'll probably naturally come out, but what has shifted in you and how you see collaboration change? Because I loved your first book, like the first edition, and also loved the update as well. So I'm intrigued about what shifted in you and your perception or your view of collaboration.
Well, I'll just mention two, I think, or three of the most fundamental changes. Sorry, I'm at the age when I say I'm going to tell you three things, I have to write them down, or I might only get to two. So
No, that's completely fine. Right away.
And the other one was, geez, I'm trying to remember the third one already. Yeah. Okay. So there are three major changes that I made in the book. The first is that when I started to rewrite the book, I had a a writing fellowship for a month at a academic institution in Paris. I'm not an academic, but it was really interesting for me to be with a group of brilliant researchers. And I had to present my project the first week I was there to the other fellows. And I said, I'm here to work on the second edition of a book called Collaborating with the Enemy, How to Work with People You Don't Agree With or Like or Trust. And one of the fellows, an urban historian from Romania named Doia Badescu, made a really helpful comment. He said, Adam, the title that you worked with, especially the subtitle, suggests that this is a very remarkable thing. Read this book about this whole new idea. And he was right, of course. That's exactly why we chose that subtitle. He said, Adam, this idea of working with people you don't agree with or like or trust is not at all a new idea. In fact, he said, it's the very definition of a city. And I thought about that going home in Paris to the residence where we were staying. And I thought he's right. This is a city. I hardly know anybody here. Probably, if I did know them, there's lots of them I wouldn't agree with or like or trust. But most of the time, we manage to do stuff together and things work reasonably well, at least for most people. So that was a big shift for me, that this idea of working across difference is not at all a new idea, but something that we've known how to do for millennia. Somebody said to me in a podcast a few weeks ago, we're pioneering this new method. And I said, no, we're not pioneering it at all.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. And that shifted my idea. The second is that in the original edition, I didn't really use the term enemy, except in the title. I thought it was a catchy title. And although I had problems with the first edition, which is why I wanted to redo it, the title was really good.
I agree.
But when I published it, one of my colleagues, Eid Hassan, said, Adam, this is a really terrible title. You risk being misunderstood as crypto-Schmittist. And I had no idea what he was talking about, and I ignored it. But when I came back to the second edition, I thought about what he'd said, and I looked up what he was referring to. And he was referring to a man named Carl Schmitt, a well-known German political scientist and lawyer who'd been a member of the Nazi Party. And Schmitt is famous for having said that all politics is about friends and enemies and about constructing friends and enemies. So this was helpful to me. I realized that sometimes we do have enemies. People are trying to hurt or injure us, but probably not as often as we think we do. And this word enemy has gone from being about people who are trying to seriously hurt or injure us to all kinds of people we disagree with, people we don't like, people who look at us funny on the street. So the second big change was to take this idea of enemy seriously, and in particular, to break out of this idea that we know that we only work with our friends and never work with our enemies. That's not true. Sometimes we have friends, but we don't need to work with them. And the people we really need to work with to do what we're trying to do are the people who, in some sense or another, are enemies. So that was addressing its criticism. And the third big change, and this I think is the most fundamental change in the book, is in the first edition, I said that there is a conventional way to collaborate. I'd like to get into this with you because I think it's probably the most important thing for your listeners. There is a conventional way to collaborate like a team where we put our own interests aside and we make a plan and everybody does their job. And I said conventional collaboration is becoming increasingly obsolete. And I think this is completely incorrect. It was a very serious error in what I wrote the first time, because in fact, I think conventional collaboration works fine and works all the time in sports teams and orchestras and surgical teams and work teams, exactly as I described it. And more specifically, and this is something that became clear to me in the rewrite, it works very well when complexity is low and conflict is low. But, and this remains the key point of the book, when complexity is high and or conflict is high, conventional collaboration doesn't work, and a different way of collaborating is required that I call stretch collaboration. So that for me was a fundamental change in the message of the book.
And I like that delineation, because I do think complexity is something that more and more organizations and teams are experiencing. So I definitely want to come back to that. But I might pick up on the enemy point to start with. You talk about enemyfying. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly.
Mm.
So what does that actually mean? How do we enemyfy people within an organization or across organizations or across boundaries? What does that actually mean?
Well, when you write a book, I think you're allowed to make up one new word per book. So that is a made up word, but which people have picked up on. It means making somebody into an enemy.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I eventually did look it up in the dictionary. What's an enemy? An enemy is somebody who's trying to hurt or injure us. And sometimes we have enemies. Sometimes people dropping bombs on our heads.
Mm.
That's an enemy. But often we use the word enemy, or we construct others as enemies because we don't like them, or we feel uncomfortable around them, or we disagree with them.
Mm.
So that's what I mean by enemyfying. And so this very serious matter of an enemy gets, or this very serious word enemy gets spread very thin across many situations. And we end up thinking so many people we have to deal with are our enemies. And that's a tough way to go through the day.
But I think it's quite common. It's quite like the us versus them. We're doing our bit, they're not doing their bit. We're right, they're wrong. And I think in organizations, it might not be these hostile situations that you've obviously helped at a country level, but they're dealing with difficult peers or misalignment in terms of task conflict, or that then becomes personal or becomes relational conflict. Or they might just feel like that team doesn't get it, or that industry group doesn't get it that we need to partner with. And how do you help organizations and people see that this concept of enemifying or enemies is actually something that we're probably doing all of the time? It's like sort of like the in group, the out group, that I think
Yeah.
we actually do it way more than we really think.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. And I do it myself all the time. And I think it's just, I mean, if I think about it in my own life, it's just a lazy shortcut. Something's not going the way we want. It's difficult. We're having an argument. We're not getting things the way we want them to be. And our first response, my first response is, what's wrong with these people? What's wrong with that person? Why are they being so difficult? It's them. So that's what I mean. And I do it all the time. And sometimes it's true and useful, but most of the time it's not true and useful. People are doing this thing that makes sense to them.
Yeah.
We might not like it. It might be inconvenient for us. It might, in extreme situations, cause us danger. But it's not usually the case, sometimes the case, but not usually the case that they're out to get us. And starting with the assumption that there's something wrong with them is a common, but I think really terrible starting place.
Yeah. It's an interesting one. It's almost the narrative or the self-talk that we label people with in the interest of coming to a conclusion quickly or what have you. Yeah.
Well, or making ourselves feel good. They're bad,
Yeah.
we're good. I'm a good guy. I'm doing the right thing. Why can't they just see that I'm right and go
Mm.
along? And that's what I mean by enemyfying. Dealing with a complicated situation or complex situation by saying they're wrong, I'm right. They're bad, I'm good. I'm the hero, they're the villain. It's a very common thing, and it gets stuck pretty quickly.
So I do a lot of work with leaders and teams and, helping them collaborate within a team, but also collaborate cross-functionally. You talk about conventional collaboration and you mentioned it before. What is conventional collaboration and how do leaders or people use this as an effective tool in their work?
Yeah. So it has three elements, but the defining element of conventional collaboration is that the collaborators, the people or groups involved, subordinate their interests to the interests of the larger effort. So in conventional collaboration, you can say to people, and people will accept, leave your own interests at the door. Think of the team. Be a good team player. And that's the essence of conventional collaboration. You may have your opinions. I'd like your input. You have special skills. I need you on the team, but I need you to put the team's objectives above your own. And I think that happens all the time. As I say, the three examples I gave on a sports team, in an orchestra, in a surgical team, to just take three examples. Yes, we need everybody's special contributions, but when push comes to shove, I need you to put your needs secondary to the team's needs. That's conventional collaboration. So it has three elements. We're emphasizing the harmony of the team. Secondly, we're agreeing, this is a little bit different, but it's also part of conventional collaboration. We're agreeing what the problem is, what the solution is, what the plan is. And then thirdly, people are going to do what they need to do to execute the plan. That's the three parts of conventional collaboration. And as I said, there's lots of ordinary contexts where that works fine, but it doesn't work when conflict is high and or complexity is high.
Yeah. And is that where stretch collaboration comes in?
Yes, exactly. The term stretch collaboration is another way to work together when conflict is high and or complexity is high. I guess another way to say this is most people think that the only kind of collaboration is conventional collaboration. And so if they need to work with others, they think we have to do it this way that I'm labeling conventional collaboration. And that, as to repeat myself, that works fine under certain contexts, but doesn't work well under other contexts. In stretch collaboration, all of the four things I mentioned are the opposite. First of all, people are not willing to subordinate their own interests to the good of the whole. I had an interesting conversation last week. I was speaking to a group of European members of parliament from different countries. And in most European countries, I think, at least the people who were on the call, they're in, coalition governments. In other words, they're needing to work with people in other political parties. And I've never spoken to a group of people who understood stretch collaboration better than this group last week. It was obvious to them that, yes, we need to work together to get stuff done, but don't imagine that I'm very often going to put my interests and my party's interests, I'm going to put those aside for the interests of the country or the particular project. It's all about working out how can we all get some of what we want and advance this piece of legislation. So, and there's lots of situations like that, not just political parties, but alliances and families and neighbors where, yes, we need to work together, but don't tell me to leave my agenda at the door. And even in work teams, and this I think's an important point, I think it's less often the case than it might have been 30 years ago for you to be able to say to your team, look, we know you have your own things to be concerned with, but could you please leave those at the door? I think people have their department's interests, their family's interests, their personal interests, and they say, yes, I want to work on this, but I need you to take my needs into account. So when you say in such a context, could you just think of the whole? It's often a manipulative request. What you're really saying is, can you pay attention to the whole that matters to me, not the whole that matters to you? And the idea that there's just one whole, the team is, it doesn't make any sense. There's always lots of wholes. There's me, my department, my family, the organization as a whole, the society. We're always trying to work out how to make things work with these different wholes. And to say, think of the whole is a really unrealistic and in many cases manipulative request. So just to finish the answer, sorry for going on so long. So given that it's not about the harmony of the team, above all, it's about embracing not only connection, but also conflict, really working through differences that are there. Number two, this is where the complexity comes in. We almost never can agree the problem, the solution, the plan, who's going to do what in advance. We have to work it out as we go, partly because of complexity. We don't know what's going to work till we try it, and partly because of conflict. We're just going to have to take it one step at a time and see how it goes. And thirdly, and most fundamentally, and this is what we were talking about 10 minutes ago, it doesn't do any good to say, I'm going to tell you what to do. The crucial thing is for people, everybody, to realize that they're part of the game, part of what's going on. And ultimately, the only thing, literally the only thing you can control is what you yourself do. So spending your time thinking about what other people ought to be doing is really a waste of time.
Yeah. Well, we can't really control what others are doing. It's really interesting because I can see in a lot of the leadership teams that I work with, but also within organizations that have to collaborate cross-functionally. Like I talk about the fact that we do actually want conflict within teams. We want teams to have a healthy debate and challenge ideas. But I still see that probably falling into the conventional collaboration that you're talking about. But it's almost when it becomes more complex that it's like those adaptive leadership challenges that you actually have to learn your way forward and experiment with. That's where the stretch collaboration often comes in, because there's lots of wins and losses and along the way too. Not everyone's going to be happy. One particular client comes to mind where they work across the health sector. And so it's not just within their organizations, it's across boundaries, and having a lot of different views and values makes it really complex to move things forward. And things move, it feels very slowly to decisions because of that. But that's almost what they need to create the environment to learn their way forward.
I've painted it as black and white, but I think an important point which you're referencing is even in conventional collaboration, there's a degree of stretching, a degree of working with difference, a degree of feeling our way forward, a degree of taking accountability for ourselves. So it's a little confusing that there's some stretching even in conventional collaboration, and there's much more stretching in stretch collaboration. Now, when you mention the health sector, I mean, it's an important example, well, for lots of reasons. Firstly, it's a sector where to get things done, we have to work across institutions and professions and disciplines. And there's lots of places in the world where things are really not going well. In my home country of Canada, the system is collapsing, and rebuilding it will take collaboration across difference. But years ago, somebody once pointed out to me, a consultant who's worked in many sectors, they said, actually working in the health sector is more difficult for a very specific reason, which is we're trying to work something out. There's real differences between different stakeholders, and somebody will say, let's think of the patients. And actually, this is not a helpful comment. Nobody had forgotten the patients. Everybody is concerned about the patients. But when you say, let's think of the patients, that request is, let's not talk about these differences between us. Let's just put that aside and pretend that it's as simple as let's think of the patient. So it is, in a way, a very classic example of let's just think of the whole and not deal with our differences, which sounds right but is wrong.
Yeah. It's so interesting because often we come back to like, what is that? What's the thing we can all agree on? What's that common ground? That's often the starting place when there's difference, to find that common ground. And so I can understand people might lean to the patients or patient-centered care or whatever the tagline might be around that, because it might be that common purpose that we can all relate to. So how helpful is it finding a common ground, or does that actually just deter from us talking about what we really need to be talking about?
Well, the reason I label the first stretch embrace conflict as well as connection is they're both important. Common ground is important and differences are important. And to ignore either of them is a terrible mistake. But for those of us, and I include myself in this category, who like everything to be happy and quiet and cheerful, what it often means is real differences, real disagreements, real disharmonies get covered up. They don't go away, they just get buried and they come back and bite us. I'm saying that both are important.
Yeah. It's interesting. Deakin University in Australia did a study on teams that only focus on difference actually causes, like from a diversity perspective, actually causes more friction, and that we need to focus on both our similarities and our differences. And so I think the end is very critical, whether it's within a team or across boundaries. Because often I feel like we lean heavily into one or the other, and it's probably the end of that. Like, what can we all agree on? Okay, where are our differences? Where do we need to focus? Yeah.
Well, and how can we unpack these differences? Let me really try to, rather than just assuming that you're a difficult person or stupid or wrong, that the solution is you should just do what I say. Can I take a few minutes to just understand, like, can you explain to me why you are looking at it this way? Where are you coming from? Often literally, what's the story and the sequence of events that led you to think the way you are thinking and acting the way you're acting? And it may be that I really understand and I still disagree and I still just want you to agree with me, but sometimes I'll say, oh, okay, so that's the thing you're concerned about. Okay, well then why don't we try this? And I'll find a way to move forward that wasn't visible to me before when I was just spending all of my time telling you that you were wrong.
Yeah. Like, I find quite commonly people end up moving from the task conflict to the relationship conflict, and it's about this person. And so people end up working around certain people to get what they need to get done. Like, when is that a legitimate strategy and when does that become a problem?
So the first point I make in the book, which is important, is that collaborating is not our only option. It's literally impossible to collaborate with everybody on everything. So the question isn't, do I want to collaborate or not? The question is, with whom do I want to collaborate, when, on what, how? So that's important because it's literally impossible to collaborate with everybody on everything. So we have a choice. I mean, we're in a situation that's not the way we want it to be. We have 4 options. We can try to force it to be the way we want it to be, regardless of what others want. Use our authority or money or position to make things the way we want them to be. Another possibility is we say we can't make things the way we want them to be. We're going to just adapt them the way they are. We're going to just live with it as it is. The third option is we can't make it the way we want it to be. We're not willing to live with it as it is. We're going to quit. And that means quit our job or get a divorce or emigrate. Or tune out. We're out of here. And the fourth option is collaborating. We're going to work with others to try to change the situation. And all 4 options are legitimate and they have their place. So the question I'm posing is, when you have decided that you want to collaborate or you want to try to collaborate, how do you do that across difference? That's what the book's about. And in those contexts, focusing on what's wrong with those people is usually not very productive for lots of obvious reasons. They usually have a reason for doing what they're doing. They're probably not going to change just because I want them to. Yeah, and when you tell somebody you're just an idiot, it's a bad start. So for lots of reasons, what you call focusing on the person is just not useful.
Yeah. What you've talked about around that choice around collaboration is actually what I referenced in my book, Thriving Teams, about the choice that you have of whether to collaborate and you have other choices. And I don't think people are explicit with those other choices that they have all the time. And I also do find that sometimes, and it can be quite cultural to an organization, that they over collaborate or probably over consult before making a decision. And that can be really ineffective too. And that's something often that I find working with clients. It's almost a relief of collaboration doesn't mean that you have to consult to every single person or work with every single person. It's actually being intentional about, well, who do you actually need to collaborate with to get the work done? And how do you work through the complexity or the challenge together in a constructive way? Yeah. So how do you suggest that organizations navigate silos? Because what I'm finding since COVID is that more of it, like, silos isn't a new thing. We've had silos for a long time, but I think they're overemphasized since COVID, probably because we have more anchor days. We kind of relate to our team. It goes back to that us versus them, or we're doing our bit, they're potentially not. How do you see stretch collaboration helping break down silos, whether that's between business units or teams or even different boundaries?
Yeah. Well, the word silo has always been a pejorative word, and I guess a more neutral word would be team or organization or department. It's a way of organizing things. It's not It's not a bad way to organize things. We almost always have to organize things in terms of a unit that's part of a larger unit, and you want people to focus on their unit and spend time with their unit. And so it's what I meant when I said there's not just one whole, and that it's counterproductive to say there's one whole, society or the organization as a whole. There's always multiple wholes. But I guess what you're saying is that focusing only on my team or my organization or my silo, depending on the scale you're talking about, means that some things work well and some things work terribly. And we often have to work across wholes, WHOLE, across units. And how do you do that? Well, the first thing is just to realize that that we're not separate. This team, this department, this organization isn't off in space, self-contained. It is part of larger wholes, whether or not we acknowledge it. And so we're going to need to collaborate across boundaries. And often that means it's not as simple as just doing what the boss says. It means there are differences that have to be worked through, and this is what I call stretch collaboration. So I'm trying to say something very simple, which is that the reality is that we're connected, we're in relationship, we're part of larger wholes, and therefore we're going to have to work across these differences. Anything else is unrealistic completely unrealistic. The idea that we can just do what we want regardless of what's happening to other people, it just doesn't work for long. It doesn't work in communities. It doesn't work in organizations. It doesn't work internationally.
And I often find the realization of we depend on each other more than we realize to get stuff done, to come to a better outcome, is often a incentive for people to want to collaborate or stretch collaborate as well. So what are some tangible things that you suggest that leaders focus on when there is complexity and conflict?
Well, let me give you a general answer or a general and then a specific idea. The other big change to the second edition of the book is that there's now tools and exercises in each chapter to work through this in your own particular context. I guess if I was to just mention one, and it's one we've alluded to already 3 or 4 times in this conversation, it's when I'm trying to work with somebody or some other group that is important and difficult, and I'm tempted to say they're just wrong. I just have to tell them again what the right answer is and push them harder to do what I want them to do or be the way I want them to be. To just take a pause and take whatever, half an hour to ask them what's going on for you? Why? Can you please explain to me how you're seeing this situation and where you've come from, as I say, literally, and why you're understanding it the way you're understanding it and doing what you're doing and proposing what you're proposing. It's the most practical thing I know how to do. And if you ask people that, they go, oh gosh, you spent the last 3 years just trying to tell me I'm wrong. Thanks for asking. Let me explain it to you. And as I say, you may find, okay, I get it now, and I still think you're wrong, and I'm going to force you to do what I want. Could be. I'm not saying it's all going to turn out to be easy, but you may say, oh, so that's what you've been going on about. Okay, I get it. I don't really see it that way, but if that's what you're concerned about, we have a different idea. Why don't we try it this way? So it's a really simple thing, but it does, as we spoke about half an hour ago, a way of escaping from I'm right, you're wrong, I'm good, you're bad, I'm the hero, you're the villain. But just suspending it and let's see what else might be there.
It's almost that asking the curious questions, listening, and then understanding others' perspectives, which requires a little bit of empathy to put yourself in their shoes as well. Yeah.
Well, and a little bit of humility, like I think I know everything, but let me just put that aside for half an hour and see, maybe there's something I'm missing here. And I often find that I've just missed, there is something else going on that I'm not paying attention to. And as I say, I might not like it, I might not want it, but it's part of the reality that I have to deal with. So let me be realistic.
And even going a step further to be bold enough to say, hey, I was actually wrong. That could
Yeah.
happen too. Yeah. It's interesting
Yeah.
because I think we all come from our, experiences and our lens of the world and how we see the world. And we're often all looking at the same challenge just with a different lens or perspective. But what I get from stretch collaboration is it's not that we all need to agree, but we just need to work out a way forward together. And you talk about experimenting a way forward. That probably feels quite uncomfortable for people, especially people who like certainty and like to know what the plan is. How do you help teams or leaders build the confidence to act when there's no clear plan or there's no consensus within a team?
Yeah. Well, I have a lot of sympathy for people who want everybody to agree, want everybody to be on the same team, want things to be clear before they start, want everybody to just do what they want. I want all of those things. But I guess my point is, in many cases, or in some cases, that's just not realistic.
Mm,
My first job out of university, I worked for an electricity company in San Francisco, Pacific Gas and Electric. And I was in the corporate planning department, which meant things were changing all the time. And we had to work things out with different departments and executives. And it was a different crisis every week. And I remember going to my boss after I'd been there a month saying, geez, it's really difficult. Things keep changing. And I thought we were doing this and now we're doing that. And he said to me, Adam, if you'd like, I can arrange a transfer to the engineering department if you'd be more comfortable. But if you want to be doing this work, this is how it is.
yeah, this is the
So
work.
this is what it's like.
Yeah.
So decide. And that's what I'm saying. We might wish everything was stable and certain and predictable and agreeable and everybody would just do what I want them to do. I get it. And you can try to find a world like that or a job like that. But in many cases, that's just not possible. And so all I'm advocating for is being realistic. And often being realistic means we're going to have differences. We do have different interests, different backgrounds, different opinions. We have things in common, but we have differences. We have to respect that and work with that. We don't know what's going to work. We're just going to have to figure it out as we go. And we can't get other people to do what we want them to do most of the time. Most of the time, it's more productive just to focus on here's my role in this and here's how I'm going to try to do it better.
I imagine in the work that you do, there must be so many times that you must think in your head, shit, these groups are never going to be able to work a way forward together. Do you notice is there a turning point or is there something that shifts that helps people move forward?
Yes. Well, first of all, let me say actually, my experience is the opposite to what you think,
Okay.
because I've worked a lot with people who are real enemies, have really big, deep, long-standing, even violent disagreements. And when they come into the same room and are able to talk and write on flip chart paper and have coffee together, amazing things can happen very quickly.
Mm.
Whereas when you're working with an existing team that may have been together for years and it's not really that important and we know each other so well, in a way, it's much harder to make a breakthrough.
Mm. So that's the work I do, and I feel like the work you do sounds a lot harder than
No. But I'm saying that's why I'm saying it.
Yeah.
I think it's harder to
Yeah.
work in situations where, well, it's not great, but we can get along. We can survive. And anyhow, I've got another life and I'm with these people all the time and they're never going to change. So I think the ordinary work is more difficult than the extraordinary work.
Because I think the hardest part of the extraordinary work might actually be, like, by the time you get them into the room, at least you've got a commitment that they want to have a discussion. It's probably getting to
Yes.
that to get the right people in the
Yes.
room is my guess.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the hard part. But once people are together, they're usually, wow, I never thought I'd be talking to these people. This is interesting. And so in a way, we can get breakthroughs more easily because when people talk, they go, oh, so that's what you've been going on about for years. I had no idea. And I still think it's wrong, but I get it now. Okay, but you asked what's the breakthrough moment. And I do have an answer to that question. It's something we've spoken about a few times already. I worked a lot in Latin America with a great facilitator named Jorge Talavera. And my Spanish is not very good. And at the time, his English was not very good. And so we would have really short conversations like chairs, circle, circle, circle. And we had a shorthand for when things were shifting. And we used to call it el click, the click. So what's the thing we were always watching for? We were watching for the moment when somebody would realize that for the situation to change, they had to change what they themselves were doing, not what other people ought to be doing. But the click was, I see. There's something I can do differently that might change the situation we're in. That's the click.
And I reckon that's a click with intact teams as well. It's often about like,
absolutely,
what's my contribution to this dysfunction or this mess, or what's actually happening here? And I can only control what I do. So
yes.
I like that click. Yeah.
Yeah. And that up until that moment, it's all those other people and what they ought to do differently. But now I'm curious about something, Claire, because I've always assumed that most people in companies think that they can get people to do what they want them to do. They're, in particular, their subordinates. So is that, I mean, I can't, but I've always assumed that other people thought they could.
Well, I think that organizations, and I'm talking in total generalist terms, have gone from command and control, do what the boss says, to maybe more passive leadership where we're not actually giving feedback or having the tougher conversations. And I do think that it's about getting the balance right between being assertive and having a clear direction, but also being empathetic and getting the team to contribute to have that healthy debate.
Yeah.
And so it definitely depends within a team. But then you've also got a lot of organizations that feel like they've got entitlement cultures where the employees are driving things more than them. And it's very organizational specific as well. You know, government, I would say, is different to not-for-profit, to corporates as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think necessarily just because the boss says it, people will just necessarily behave that way. And I sometimes also think that leaders aren't that assertive or clear with what they're very ambiguous with what they need, especially how teams are structured. They're so dependent on multiple teams to get the work done, which requires cross-functional collaboration at your level. So you don't have that formal authority, but you still need to get the work done. And so that requires conversations, reprioritizing, talking about, oh, this is really important to us, this is important to you. And it's often the gap that happens. And that's when the finger pointing and blame, I would say, happens a lot. So it isn't as simple from a hierarchy perspective, because I think we just have multidisciplinary teams that require each other, which goes back to the whole thing you're talking about the whole. We need each other. We depend on each other.
Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm particularly interested in, Adam, is you've obviously been in some really tough situations. Like what do you think is your biggest learning as a facilitator, helping to facilitate some of those differences to help them move forward?
Well, I wrote a book. One of my books is specifically on facilitation. It's called Facilitating Breakthrough. And I'm using facilitation not just to refer to a particular job by a professional facilitator, but anybody who's helping a group collaborate to move forward. And the place I start in the book, and I think the most important point, is that we're used to thinking about facilitation being about getting people to do things. When I give talks, about 100% of the time, somebody will ask me, how do you get people to do this or that or the other thing? And it relates to what we were talking about 5 minutes ago about the extent to which we can get people to do things. And what I finally figured out is that I can't get anybody to do anything. I mean, not really. Not in my family, not in my company, and certainly not in facilitating. But this phrase, getting people to do things, is so common. That's why I say it comes up in 100% of Q&As. So what's the alternative? And the alternative is removing the obstacles that stand in the way of people doing what they think they need to do. and everybody's trying to contribute, do their thing. Everybody's trying to be in connection, and everybody's wanting things to be fair. Those three things. They're not straightforward, they're in tension. And so the big point I make in facilitating breakthrough is the job of the facilitator is to organize things, which means really just space and time, the agenda and the chairs, if you want to put it in practical terms, that removes the obstacles to people doing what they want to do.
Mm.
And it's not always that they're not always wanting the same thing, and then let them work it out. And don't think that I'm going to get them to do anything at all. Not my job.
Yeah. In Thriving Teams, I talk about the role of leader as being the leader as a coach, but the leader as a facilitator, and how you actually have to help others reach the outcome and navigate the way for them to get there. Maybe without even knowing what the outcome might be.
Exactly.
So the final question I've got, Adam, is if you could leave our listeners with one message about Thriving Teams, what would that message be?
The message is, and I think this is basically the message of my life's work, is that it is possible to work together across difference and get big things done. It's not easy. It's not straightforward. It's not guaranteed, but it can be done. I've seen it with my own eyes, even in really extreme settings, but it requires us to stretch beyond what's comfortable.
I love that. I think that's when we do our greatest work, when we're stretched and out of our comfort zone as well. Thank you so much, Adam. I've got a lot of ideas. It was a great conversation. So I do really appreciate you coming on the Thriving Leaders podcast. Thanks.
My pleasure.
What a great chat with Adam. I've been sitting with this conversation ever since we recorded it, and I keep coming back to this idea about enemyfying. The idea that we're all doing it probably every day, labeling people as someone that's difficult or wrong or just being hard work, when really they're just seeing things through a different lens to us. That's not actually an enemy. That's just us being human and having a different set of experiences. And I love the distinction that Adam makes between conventional collaboration and stretch collaboration. Because I think most of us have been operating on the assumption that there's only one way to collaborate. Put the team first, leave your interests at the door, agree on the plan and execute it. But as Adam points out, when complexity is high and conflict is real, that approach just doesn't hold. We need something more honest than that. The other thing I'm taking away is this idea of the click. That moment when someone stops focusing on what everyone else needs to do differently and instead asks, what can I do differently here? I've seen that shift happen in rooms I've facilitated, and it changes everything. It's the moment the conversation stops being about blame and starts being about progress. If you're leading a team that's navigating real complexity or trying to work across boundaries where there's genuine tension, I think this episode will give you a completely different way of thinking about what's actually possible. Because as Adam said, it is possible to work across difference and get big things done. It's not always comfortable, but that's usually where the best work happens. Thanks for joining us at the Thriving Leaders podcast. If you'd like to find out more about our leadership programs, facilitation, keynote speaking, or executive or team coaching, head to our website, www.thrivingculture.com.au. This is also where you can sign up for our newsletter, where I share useful tips on leadership and team development, as well as our podcast. You can also grab a copy of either of my books on our website, and it's also available on all good online retailers, including Audible, Spotify, and Kindle. If you like this episode, I'd be so grateful if you left a 5-star review, as it helps us reach more people and therefore helps more leaders thrive. Please subscribe.